on the globe, except Antarctica. So how could coronavirus start to affect you? Our science correspondent Thomas Moore is here alongside an expert panel of guests to answer your questions this afternoon. We have retail analyst Kate Hardcastle, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter, Dr. Bharat Pankania, and Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent. We'll be seeing them shortly. I'm going to talk to Thomas first, though. Thomas, lots of people getting in touch with their questions. Let's first talk about the World Health Organization earlier on saying the word pandemic is not helpful and it's likely to inflame the situation. But we heard the Health Secretary earlier on, Matt Hancock, in the House of Commons, giving us an update, using the P word a lot. The EU, their processes, they're calling it a pandemic as well. Paul Connew on Twitter asks, has the time not come for the WHO to classify coronavirus as a pandemic, given how we've seen it spread in the last 24 hours or so?
Well, certainly some doctors I've spoken to have called this a pandemic in all but name. It clearly has a dictionary definition. It is global spread of a severe infectious disease, and many people would say we've reached that point now. The World Health Organization is very cautious about calling it a pandemic because it got into a lot of trouble back in 2009 with the swine flu pandemic, that a lot of countries were waiting for the call, which didn't come for a long time and therefore delayed action and so on. This time round, they're not going to get into that hot water. What they're saying is that each country should be able to make a risk judgment for themselves on how bad the outbreak is in their country and take the appropriate action there.
It's interesting, a lot of people getting in touch saying, you know, the message from the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, essentially was keep calm and carry on when he spoke to Commons this afternoon. And the advice being drummed into people is if you're in doubt, call NHS 111 and self-isolate. What does self-isolating mean? It's
a really good question. I mean, at the moment, the test is a swab of the throat, of mucus, and that is looking for genetic material from the virus. So it will identify people who've got an active infection. If that result then comes back as positive, you'll be asked to stay at home for 14 days. That is the period that you are thought to be infectious for. And that essentially will mean that you do not go out, you don't go to work, you don't take public transport, you don't pop to the shops. You can, though, still have deliveries made to your home. So friends and relatives can do your shopping for you. You can still get somebody to bring a takeaway around. Those kind of things can still go on. But you should be minimising contact with other people, because the longer you spend surrounded by other people, the greater the chance that you'll be passing the virus on.
OK, Thomas, let's bring in our panel that I mentioned before. We've got an expert in travel, an expert in business and retail, and a public health expert as well. Simon Calder, our travel expert, I'll come to you first. We've just heard about that Six Nations rugby game in Dublin being called off, so people probably going to travel to Dublin will think twice. I've got a question here from Nicola Beveridge on Twitter. She says, I'm going on a cruise on the 6th of March. I fly via Edinburgh, Heathrow, Rio in Brazil. Brazil, of course, confirming its first case. Then I go to Tenerife, Lisbon, Cadiz. I mean, this sounds like an incredible cruise. She says, should I cancel? Because she's effectively hitting every hotspot here. She says, though, if I do cancel, I lose around £4,000.
Of course she shouldn't cancel. What a wonderful opportunity. But I would be so careful. You are going through the busiest airport in Europe, London Heathrow. You'll be changing planes there, and airports are the places that I reckon present the biggest biohazard. It's a microbiological party. Everybody from around the world converges with their own personal germs, and they all get mixed up, particularly in the security area. At airports, be really careful in terms of not getting too close to people. I know that's difficult when you're in queues, and certainly after the security search, particularly if you've been handling the tray that you put all your liquids and your phone in, go and have a good old wash and with proper soap and water, because that's probably the biggest danger you're going to encounter in your entire wonderful holiday. And then, just things like keeping a distance from anybody who looks ill, which you'll do anyway because you're a sensible person, and if you can, pay for food and drink with contactless rather than handling cash. But apart from that, it sounds a great trip. And look, I must pick you up. You said hotspots. Well, yeah, there's some unfortunate cases in Tenerife, but the chances of any of us going to places where there are cases and actually being in proximity with people who've got the virus long enough to catch it are thankfully extremely low. And even if you do pick it up, I would say the biggest danger for the vast majority of people, leaving aside the cohort of over 70s and people with unfortunately weakened immune systems, the biggest danger is that you bring it back and you spread it. That's what worries me about it, not actually having the nasty, but for most people, not fatal virus.
Yeah, Thomas nodding sagely along there, because we keep hearing about NHS 111, we keep hearing about self-isolation, but personal hygiene as well. We can't emphasise that enough. Thank you, Simon. And Nicola Beveridge has just tweeted me a few minutes ago. Kate, this is Hannah, I beg your pardon, Hannah Kelso. This one's for you, Kate. It's about employers' duty of care. Hannah says, I'm a university student doing a clinical placement at a large hospital for 40 weeks this year. What are my rights in terms of going to a placement during a pandemic? And what is my employer's duty of care towards me?
Well, I think an important note is that we've got information through that many people are being asked to take this 14-day isolation period. And there's certainly some questions about where people stand. It's very important to speak to your employer and understand your contractual rights when it comes to things like this, because unless you're actually sick with an illness, you might not get the sick pay you think you're due, and you have to speak to them. Many big businesses will be able to make the decision that they're going to treat the welfare of their staff, both at the office or at work, at place of work, and at home equally as well, and they will probably cover that 14-day period. However, it's not always the case, so important to check that detail. Also, work with your organisation to see what information they need from you, how often they need you to update them, speak to them constantly, look out for notice boards, information briefings. And another quick point to mention as well is actually if you are in an isolated period of 14 days, if you can work with your organisation, perhaps do some work from home for them, or look to be actually responsible in trying to deliver on your work still whilst you're off work. Not always possible where we've got roles that are completely reliant on placement of your activities, but it's important to speak to your employer all the way through.
Dr. Pankani, I've got a question for you. A lot of people very concerned about a leaked UK government document talking about a reasonable worst-case scenario when it comes to coronavirus. A lot of people talking about this on social media. Perhaps you can shed some light on it. It says in this reasonable worst-case scenario, 80% of British citizens could be infected with the coronavirus COVID-19 and around 500,000 would die. Can you put that into perspective for us? Is there some truth in that?
Oh, we're happy to do so. I haven't looked at this leaked document, but thinking empirically and from first principles. So if I was given that scenario, my answer is very straightforward. It's easy to answer. So this is a new virus, and because it is a new virus, we expect people to get infected. That's nothing new. That's not a big deal. I want to reassure our listeners, which is this, and you heard it before from our other commentator, that most people who get infected will get better, and most people will suffer a mild illness. Only a very few numbers will actually need to see a doctor, and fewer still go to hospital, and fewer still go to ITU. Now, when we talk about what is a technical term called case fatality rate, it means of those people who become ill, how many go on to die. And when you are talking about large percentages, large numbers, and then a small percent of a very large number, obviously it sounds alarming that, goodness me, are so many people going to die? But if you put it into perspective, with the seasonal influenza infection, a lot of people die every year from seasonal influenza infection, which, by the way, is preventable. So we need to have that perspective. And when you start thinking about large numbers, it's unnecessarily worrying. And I would want our listeners not to be.
Doctor, can I just ask you a question? Because we're seeing here a lot of effort being taken globally now, driven by the World Health Organization, to try and contain this virus. If flu is a much bigger problem every year, we let that go by. We don't take this extreme action. So is there something we're not being told about this COVID-19 outbreak?
No. Why would we want to lie, and why would we want to not tell you the truth? My University of Exeter has never censored me, and I don't have a brief of go here, go there, or don't go there. So let me share with our listeners what I would like to share with anyone, which is the reason why everyone is excited and concerned about it is because this is a new virus. This has emerged in China and is now spreading to cause illness. And the excitement and concerns are because it is new, it's brand new. And because it's brand new, we don't know a lot about it. To put it in context and give a balancing act for you, I would say the coronavirus appears to be a little bit worse than the seasonal influenza virus, but it's only a little bit more worse than the seasonal influenza virus. It is not something completely different, which is going to be a shock to the system. We don't see that evidence. So I hope I can give that reassuring messages for our listeners
Simon,
and viewers.
Simon, another question for you. It's interesting, many people getting in touch saying, look, I'm looking at what's going on. I've planned a holiday, say, to Tenerife or Italy. And even though the risk might be low and the government is saying you can still travel to those areas, I just don't want to go. So what are their rights?
Well, you have none, effectively. I mean, there's a there's a few odd cases. So, for instance, if you were going to the rugby in Dublin and you booked a package that included match tickets and it was clear that you were going there for the purposes of seeing a rugby match, same applies for Italy, England in Rome, then you would be able to claim a full refund if the match doesn't go ahead. But for everybody else, and I've talked to lots and lots of people, I've never known quite such concern about this, going to Florence, going to Venice, going to Milan, how lovely, skiing in the Italian Alps, absolutely great. The travel industry's attitude is, we're still flying, your holiday still exists, there's no Foreign Office warning against going, disinclination to travel doesn't cut it, doesn't mean anything, you'll lose most or all of your money, and your travel insurer will not. Flexibility I've seen so far is British Airways is saying if you're booked to go to northern Italy in the next week or so, you can postpone, but only till the end of March, and a lot of people won't be happy with that. And of course, if you've got flights, car rental, skiing booked on top of that, then that's not going to help either. So it's a very blunt, the holiday is going ahead.